Good evening, my friends. We are going to start, with your permission, our shiur on the Zera Shimshon. We've been going strong. We started from Bereshit last year, beginning of this year actually. We're already up to the end of Sefer Shemot almost, Parashat Tisa. The Zera Shimshon has a lot to say about Parashat Tisa. That's because there's a lot of different topics. Some of the most famous ones are the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf, among other things. But I want to focus on a couple of short pieces that he has here. Short, relatively short compared to what he writes. About a very applicable, common topic, Shabbat Kodesh. It's never a bad time to learn about Shabbat. So this week's Parashat, we have a few famous Pesukim about Shabbat, and he's going to talk about it. Here it says, we're going to start with Drush Dalid, and maybe if we have time, we will go to one more. Drush number Vav, maybe, as a bonus. Says Zera Shimshon. He quotes a pasuk in the Torah. This week's Parashat. It says, Hashem says to Moshe, to tell over to the Jewish people, Ach et Shabbatotai tishmoru. Only you shall keep my Shabbatot. Only you shall keep my Shabbats. Shabbatotai means Shabbat plural. Shabbats. Keep my Shabbats, says God. That's in the Sefer Shemot, chapter 31, verse 13, for those who want to look it up. Zera Shimshon has a very simple question on this pasuk. Kashe, lama katav Shabbatotai b'lashon rabim, v'lo amar et ha-Shabbat, kamo shematzinu b'chol ha-Torah. This is the whole Torah, whenever Hashem talks about Shabbat, it says, singular, Shabbat. Keep my Shabbat, hold the Shabbat, remember the Shabbat. Shabbat is a holy day, work 6 days and then rest on Shabbat. Singular, Shabbat. All of a sudden, this pasuk now says, Shabbatotai. God says, my Shabbats. Why, in this place in the Torah, does Hashem all of a sudden decide to write this verse in a plural? Every detail in Torah has depth, remember. Nothing is for no reason. And that's why he's asking this question. Umilat ach ma ba'al ma'et. And another question he has on the word ach, aleph chaf sofit, not aleph hayt. Aleph hayt means brother. Aleph chaf sofit means only. It means an exclusion. It's specifying something. And the pasuk says, ach et shabbatotai tishmoru. Only my Shabbats you should keep. He has a question, why does this word belong here as well? Gam yeshli, like take further we should analyze, says the Zera Shimshon, al ma she'amru zal b'perek gimel de Shavuot. He brings you a Gemara Masechet Shavuot, page 20, Amud Bet, says over there. Shezachor v'shamor b'dibur echad ne'emru. Right, we know this. It says that the word shamor, which means to guard, to keep, and zachor, which means to remember or mention, were said with one speech, so to speak. What is this referring to? It's referring to the two different places in the Torah where Hashem commands us to keep the Shabbat. In one place it says, Zachor Yom Shabbat lekadesho. Remember the day of Shabbat to sanctify it. Zachor also means to mention, to actually mention. Leazkir. Leazkir means to mention, to say. The way you fulfill that mitzvah of Zachor Yom Shabbat is by saying Kiddush on Friday night. That is the actual utterance. You're actually doing the act of mentioning it, that you recite that paragraph in Torah, Yom HaShishi, etc., that Hashem created the world 6 days and rested on the seventh. That's Zachor, that's mention. Remember the Shabbat. But in another place in the Torah, it says, Shamor et Yom Shabbat. Guard the day of Shabbat. Keep the day of Shabbat. Protect it. Very famously, it's in the two places where the Torah speaks about the Ten Commandments. In Parashat Yitro, which we read a few weeks ago, Ten Commandments over there, the first time we see in the Torah, it says Zachor, remember. In Parashat Vayetchanan, in Sefer Devarim in the summer, we're going to read B'ezrat Hashem, where Moshe repeats the Ten Commandments with slight nuanced differences. This is one of those differences. It says Shamor et Yom Shabbat, keep the Shabbat. Different language. And the Gemara Masechet Shavuot says, don't be worried. Just because you're seeing in one place in the Torah it's written one way, in another place it's written another way, Shamor and Zachor b'dibur echad were said with one speech, which is the famous lyric that we say in Lecha Dodi. Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad. That's what it is. It's coming from this Gemara. They were said together, says the Gemara, in one speech. His question is simple. He says, why in the first time the Torah shows us the Ten Commandments it says Zachor, remember, and the second time it says Ten Commandments, like I just told you, it says Shamor, keep. Why specifically like that? Why not the reverse? Why not something else? That's his question. V'od temiha, further question, gedolah, big question, he says. שבדיברות הראשונות נותן הכתוב טעם על שמרת השבת. Because the first time Hashem tells us about the Ten Commandments in Parashat Yitro, the Torah gives us a reason for why to keep Shabbat. It says, because 6 days God created the world, and on the 7th day He rested. Then, which means zecher lebriat haolam. Now it's understandable why. It's a zecher. The word zachor again means to remember, and a zecher means a remembrance. That we keep Shabbat as a remembrance, as a sign, as a representation that we accept and testify and understand that God created the world in 6 days. So over there it gives us the reason. But the second time the Torah says the Ten Commandments, which is in Parashat V'etchanan, Natan Tam Acher gives a different reason for keeping Shabbat. Different reason. Why? It says Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. It says it's a remembrance for how you guys came out of Egypt. I took you out of Egypt. Hold on a second. You just told me on the Parashat Yitro that Shabbat is because Hashem created the world in 6 days, and we have to behave like Him and rest on the 7th. But now you're telling me a few pages, scroll down in the Sefer Torah, you go to Parashat V'etchanan, and it says, oh no, it's because of you guys coming out of Egypt. It's a remembrance for that amazing event, coming out of Egypt. Shabbat. Which one is it? Is it both? Why saying different things in different places? That's the question. As it says over there, you shall remember that you were a slave in Mitzrayim. You were a slave in Mitzrayim. That's what it says in the second place. So now, before he gives the answers to all these wonderful questions, he's going to give you first an important introduction. Nakdim, let us give you an introduction, says Zera Shimshon. Letaretz mai desilka mineh. Amru Zal. It says in Masechet Eruvin. Because in Gemara, Masechet Eruvin. Daf Nun Dalet 54a. It says, Ki Kishniyot Kishnitnu Luchot Harishonot. When the first tablets were given, this week's Parashat, Moshe comes down with the first tablets. God's handiwork. God directly. It says the finger of God etched in those words, whatever that means. These were miraculous luchot. You don't know. First of all, they were cubical. People get it wrong. They think it was like the top was rounded. Actually, they were cubical, says the Gemara. And they were miraculous. How? You could read it from any side of the cube, and it says the same thing. The letters were bored through one side to the other. And if I read it from this side, or if I turned it around and read it from this side, it said the same thing. Miraculously. It's miraculous. It's God's handiwork. Not only that, the letters, like I said, were etched all the way through. Now certain letters, think about we have two letters that are completely closed off. The letter Samich and the letter Mem Sofit. So if you're telling me it was etched all the way through, then that little space in between of the remainder, of the stone should come out or fall out. How would you read it as a Samech or a Mem Sofit? It would just be a hole. So another part of the miracle was that middle part levitated within the stone. So you could read it as a Samech or a Mem Sofit. These are very special luchot, the first ones. And when they were given, it says in Eruvin, nitnu lehem chirut miyetzer hara chirut mishi'ibud malchuyot. They were so powerful that in that moment when they were first given, before Moshe broke them, the people were released from the Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, and the people were released from having to suffer under a foreign kingship. They were released.
When they first got it?
When Hashem first gave it to Moshe. Before he broke them. Meaning any pull to sin. And he pulled us in. Now the question becomes, hold on a second, at that moment they were making the golden calf. So you really have to go into details. Really, it wasn't the Jews themselves, it wasn't the descendants of Yaakov who did it. It was the Erev Rav. Look in the commentaries, Rashi explains over there because it says the word Am, the nation. Every time it says the word nation, it's reference to the special Erev Rav, mixed multitude of nations that Moshe Rabbeinu took out with him because they wanted to come with him, and he decided, yes, I'll take them out of Egypt because they wanted to convert. He converted them, but of course they were tainted. They were not only tainted, but they were highly affected by their previous experiences, and they caused a lot of the issues in the desert. That's why when God spoke to him on Mount Sinai, as the Egel HaZahav was happening, he says, Lech red ki shechet amecha. God says to Moshe, go down from the mountain, go, descend, because your nation has sinned. Amecha, the word am again is a hint to the Erev Rav. Why amecha? Because Moshe decided to take them out. Hashem says, you didn't ask me if you should take them out. You took them out, they instigated and they brought down the Jews as well. But instead they brought them down as well. Why? Because they didn't stop them. They should have stopped them. You can't watch such an egregious sin and just sit idly by.
Because they saw who died. They saw who died, Miriam's son.
Yeah, who was killed by them as well. That's why Aaron delayed. It's the whole thing. It's the whole thing. Still, but they had numbers though. Who was by himself? Who was the one person? He was, who stood up for the right thing, and look what happened to him. If they came as a group, they could have maybe done something else. Could have stopped them. Okay, that's not for now. Anyway, when the first luchot were given, says the Gemara, they were freed from their evil inclination. They were freed from having to serve under other nations in the future, from being exiled in the future, having to be exiled in the future. And it says in Tehillim, Ani amarti Elohim atem. I said, you are like God. Meaning in Tehillim, God is, David HaMelech is writing in the name of God, so to speak, that God said to us in that moment, we are godly in that moment. You're on the level of Kiviyachol, as if God. But when they sinned, with the golden calf, the Yetzer Hara got reinstated. Not only reinstated, he got a promotion. Okay? וידוע, and it's known, מה שכתבו המפרשים wrote ז"ל, שאם היו מתעכבים ישראל במצרים עד תשלום 430 שנה, כמו שנגזר עליהם, the Chachamim teach us that if Bnei Israel stayed in Egypt for the full term that they were supposed to, that they were decreed upon, which is 430 years, that's what Hashem decreed to Abraham's children, was 430 years. If they stayed the full 430 in Egypt, lo hayta od umma velashon yechola leshalot behem. Their debt for all of history would have been paid.
Would have been what?
Paid off. Which means they would never have had to have gone into exile in the future. As you know, in history has told us that there were many exiles. We're still in one right now. The Babylonian, Greek, Roman, Persian, okay, all these things still happen. We're still at the end of the, technically the Roman exile, because we never fully came back after that. So, if they stayed the full 430, that would have been a full payoff. They never would have to been in exile again. However, there was another thing that came up that forced God's hand, so to speak, that He had to take them out earlier than what was it. Why? Because they were so deep in Tum'ah. They were almost to the 50th gate of Tum'ah, which is, there's no return from there. 50 in Kabbalah is a number of vast infinity, and it's like the highest level of something you can reach within something. 50. Once you reach there, it's very difficult to return, almost impossible, pretty much. That's why that's why God had to take them out early, but because of that, they still had a debt to pay of all the future exiles. So God had to spread out the loan, so to speak, throughout history, where they paid it out in different ways throughout history. That's why they had to go through exiles. Therefore, when it comes to the first luchot, that they were on a godly level on Israel when Hashem first gave those first tablets. It says, that I say you were like God, right? Tehillim says that. That's why shayach ikar Shabbat u'shmiratam b'zachor. That's why the word, going back to the original question, that's why when the mitzvah of Shabbat was first given in the first set of 10 commandments, it says zachor et yom Shabbat. Remember the day of Shabbat. Because they were at a certain status, of a godly status. No yetzer hara. Over there, zachor applies. Why? Mishum shezachor zo mitzvat aseh v'shamor lo ta'aseh. The word zachor in the Torah means you should do something. It's God is commanding you to do a positive mitzvah, to do an act. What's that act? Like I said, the actual practical act of how we practice it. We recite the Kiddush on Friday night. That's a mitzvah taseh, doing mitzvah. Shamor, however, which is the other way that Shabbat comes up later on in the Torah, is keep or guard. That's a mitzvah, that's talking about mitzvot lo ta'aseh, not transgressing. Right? There's a difference between doing, building something, doing what God said to do, keep the Shabbat. For example, all the examples, put on tefillin, say kriyat shema, eat matzah on Pesach. These are actions to do. That's a building. Versus, be careful not to do things, right? Don't marry so-and-so women. Don't eat chametz on Pesach. Don't eat non-kosher. Don't do all these things, right? That's shamor. Shamor applies to that. So before they get to the don'ts, the don'ts are a low level. They didn't need that yet. They were on such a high level where they were in a status where they were build with God, build their relationship. Anytime you build a relationship, you do things. Right? Anyone who's married knows it's not enough to say to your wife, listen, you should love me so much. I'm such an amazing husband to you. Why? I didn't cheat on you. What do you mean you didn't cheat on me? I didn't cheat on you. I didn't hit you in the face. What do you mean? This is the basics. Well, yeah, but you're not supposed to do that. I didn't do it. I'm good. Fine, you can say that. See how far it gets you. But when you tell her that you've done things, I brought you flowers. I bought you a beautiful present. I appreciate you. I help you out in the house. I do things. That's a much stronger relationship builder. That's the difference between mitzvot aseh and mitzvot lo ta'aseh. Mitzvot aseh is you're building a relationship with God, right? And then you need to be at a certain baseline. If you're way down here doing terrible things, transgressing, you're not so to speak ready yet to build. Right? You have to first get to the neutral, stop doing bad, and then build good. Famous pasuk in Tehillim. Sur mira va'aseh tov. Remove yourself from bad, then you can start doing good ultimately. Remove from bad, then do good. Meaning, that doesn't mean that, if your person is making sins, don't do any other mitzvot that are building. It doesn't mean that. It's just talking about the ideal approach. That if you want the building mitzvot that you make, which is the mitzvot aseh, to actually last, and actually continue building and create your relationship with God, you have to first ideally remove all the bad first. Right? Foundation has to be good in order so that what you build can stay and stand. So that's the highest level. So before the first luchot were broken, when Moshe came down with the first luchot, that was the highest level. They were on that level of already building. That's why it says Zachor et Yom Shabbat lekadasho, which is a positive. Remember Shabbat. Now you can build with me, God says. Positive mitzvah. V'aseh the Shabbat hu lekadisho b'machal u'mishteh, and the aseh, the positive mitzvah of Shabbat, is to sanctify it by, first we said saying kiddush, that's an action, but also bringing amazing and delightful food and drink, enjoying, and divrei Torah as well. V'shamor, but later in the Torah when it says shamor, that's already a negative. Shamor means stop yourself from doing bad. Don't transgress. Don't cheat, like we said. Right? That's shamor. That's at the end of the Torah. When it was repeated, the second commandments and the mitzvah of Shabbat, it went down a level.
So while you're building a garden.
Yes, but now we're saying that because it says shamor, haynu shelo la'asot bo melacha, it means guard Shabbat. Don't break Shabbat. Don't do things you're not supposed to do. Guard yourself from breaking it. Instead of building, now it's hold yourself from destroying. Right? Before they made the sin of the calf, like we said before, they made the sin of the golden calf, the Yetzer Hara was removed from them. That's why they were only in the plane of building. That's why it says Zachor, build. Later on when they sinned and they acquired the Yetzer Hara back, now it was applicable to say to them again, the second, Shamor, that now you have to keep and guard, because the Yetzer Hara is back. he's going to try to pull you to break Shabbat. That's why now it says Shamor at the end of the Torah, because now it's more applicable. Now you need Shamor. אפילו בכל לא היה עושה מלאכה, בסדר. כמו שהיה לעתיד דכתיב, like it says in Yeshaya, in the prophet Isaiah, ועמדו זרים וראו צונכם. Right? It says, and this also applies to the times of Mashiach, when there's no Yetzer Hara, what happens? Others will stand up for you, says the prophet Isaiah, and they will shepherd your flock for you. They will do your work for you, your business. You don't have to work. Others will do it for you. That's the utopian society eventually when Mashiach comes. That's where we're aiming for. And that's what they had for a small moment before they did the Egel HaZahab, before they broke the first Luchot. ועד רבן, on the contrary, לא היו חוששים, נמי לאכילה ושתייה, בסדר, ומשום הכי, הוא צריך לומר להם, זכור שהוא עיקר צריך להם, like we explained. That's step one. He goes on to say here, אמנם nevertheless, לאחר שחטאו, once they sinned, הוא צריך להזהירם על שביתת המלאכה. They needed to be warned to not break, like we said, to not destroy, to not break Shabbat, to guard themselves. שזהו העיקר הצריך להם לעת עתה, because that was what was needed for them at that moment, because the Yetzer Hara came back, like we explained. ובדיברות הראשונות, the first לוחות, however, שלא היה להם עוד גלויות אחרות. At that time, they had no other exiles. טעם השבת היה מפני בריאת העולם. The reason of Shabbat, right, the second question that he asked was, why does the Torah give two different reasons for Shabbat, for keeping Shabbat? The first time, by Zachor, it says, it's because God created the world. The second time, by Shamor, it says, because you came out of Egypt. What's the difference? Why two different reasons? The first time, when they were on the high level of the first Luchot, no Yetzer Hara, the only applicable reason was because God created the world in 6 days. It was a testimony, it was a remembrance, that's all that really mattered. They didn't have to do anything else. Aval, but once they sinned, a new reason, meaning they sinned and they acquired the Yetzer Hara back, a new reason for Shabbat was given, and that was the leading of Egypt, connected to Egypt. How? Because remember we said they came out of Egypt early. They came out of Egypt before the 430 years were filled up, and therefore they still had some debt to pay on their account. They still had to be sent to other exiles in the future. And it says in Masechet Shabbat 118b, Aminan, Kol HaMashemer Shabbat Nitzol Mishibud Machiyot. It says whoever keeps Shabbat will be saved from being enslaved, put to work by other kingdoms. Shabbat saves you, right? It's counterintuitive, because when they used to live in other places, everyone worked on Shabbat, and they looked at us and it's like, what are these weirdos? These weird Jewish people. They don't work on Saturday, as they call it, right? So you would think, okay, if anything, they're going to force us to work. Maybe we should work on Shabbat. Opposite, says the Gemara. No, if you don't work on Shabbat, you keep Shabbat properly, you'll be saved from their hands, of those foreign kingdoms. That's why דווקא בדיברות האחרונות נתן להם טעם זה על השבת. That's why when they got the Ten Commandments are written the second time, that's why it says Shamor, keep. Why? Because now they would have to end up going to exile, like we said. That's why it says the reason of Zech Litziat Mitzrayim in the second time. You left out of Egypt, which means you came out of there early, which means you still have to pay with other exiles. But even though you're going to be another exiles, make sure Shamor the Shabbat, keep the Shabbat, in order not to be affected by the other kings. Yes. בדייק שפיר, קרא לממר וזכתה כי עבד היית ויוציאך השם אלוקיך משם ביד חזקה ובזרוע נטויה. That's why it makes sense in the verse, because over there the second set of the Ten Commandments where it says Shamor Yom Shabbat, it says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt and God took you out with a strong arm. That implies that they had to be forced out. What do you mean strong arm? A lot of explanations, but here the Zera Shimshon is explaining that they were forced out. They had to be pulled out because they didn't feel it was too early. It was before the full 430. God pulled them out. Before they reached into the ultimate level of Tum'ah, God had to pull them out. And that's the connection he says here. That's why Yad Chazakah, strong arm. וסיים הכתוב, על כן ציווך השם אלוקיך לעשות את יום השבת כדי שתפדה נפשך משעבוד ומחיות. We said that's why. Okay, well, let me explain. And now we can explain finally the original question was why in this verse of all the places in the Torah where it speaks about Shabbat, it says the word Shabbat in plural, Shabbatotai. Keep my Shabbats. Why here? The Parashat Zukatab, it says Achet Shabbatotai. Only keep my Shabbats. Shemikra ze ne'amar le'achar chet ha'egel. Why? Because this verse was said after the sin of the golden calf. After they came down from that level of godliness, after the first set of luchot were destroyed, after the zachor level, now they're in the shamor level, the lower level. Therefore, what? It says in Shemot, in our parasha, Yavo zahav shebemishkan v'yichaper al zahav ha'egel. Right? This is right after the Mishkan was commanded also. Hashem commanded Moshe to build the Mishkan out of gold to atone for the sin that they made with gold, which was the golden calf. V'chatav ach, and it says the word only as a specification, lomar, to teach you, ata shechatatam garam lachem shechazar yetzer hara v'shibul machayot. Now that you've sinned and you've caused the yetzer hara to return back to you, hatikun shelachem, the way you fix your problem, your remedy, who shetishmeru shabbatai, that you should keep my Shabbats, plural. Why plural? Lashon rabim, because it says in Masechet Shabbat as well, famous saying, in maleh mishamrim Israel bet Shabbatot miyad nigalim. If all Am Yisrael would keep 2 Shabbats, plural, they would immediately be redeemed from their exiles. Immediately, that's all it takes. Mashiach would come. 2 Shabbats. Huh? But you have to show me that. The Gemara says 2. So that's why it says plural in this over here, because Hashem is hinting, keep my Shabbats. You have to keep 2 Shabbats. All you have to do is keep 2 Shabbats, and the story is going to come to its full climax. Now, if that's going to happen, we have to pray to Hashem with all our hearts. Okay, we have a few minutes. I want to tell you another chidush. He says here. It says the following. Another pasuk that shows up in our parasha, which is right after this, very famous pasuk. We say it every Shabbat. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael Shabbat la'asot Shabbat le'dorotam. Translation: and the children of Israel kept Shabbat to make Shabbat la'asot Shabbat. That's what it says. They kept Shabbat to make Shabbat for all their whole generations. Berit olam, as an eternal covenant. The Midrash says on this, Rabbi Natan Omer, Minayin ata Omer shekol mi shemishamer et Shabbat kitikuna ma'aleh alav ki'ilu shamar kol Shabbatot miyom shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu ha'olam ad sheyihu mitim. From where do we know, says Rabbi Natan, the following principle, that if somebody keeps a Shabbat kitikuna, which means according to its proper tikkun, properly, that the pasuk considers, the Torah considers that upon him as if he kept every single Shabbat from the time Hashem created the world until it's going to be the resurrection of the dead. Whole span of history. All you have to do is keep 1 Shabbat, kitikuna, whatever that means, properly and appropriately. Then when you come to Shemaim, you're going to see on your account, right? Mashiach, we have Mashiach over here. Or Avrash, or all of us over here, kept every single Shabbat since God created the world. Imagine what kind of reward that is. That means exactly what it means. It means your account has exponential parabolic, like this. Now, so you're asking, what does it mean kitikuna? What does it mean properly? Excellent question, my friend. Excellent question. So Rabbi Natan says, first of all, how do we know that the principle is true? He says, we know from our pasuk. It says, V'shamru b'nei Yisrael. He says, this pasuk is the verse, the source for this. The V'shamru b'nei Yisrael, because what does the verse mean? And b'nei Yisrael kept Shabbat. Right? Which means it's as if they already kept everything. The verse says it in a way, V'shamru, they kept the Shabbat. So the Shabbat is a general term, which sounds like every Shabbat, ever. Bnei Yisrael kept the Shabbat. That's what, if you read the simple words, V'shamru Bnei et ha-Shabbat. And Bnei Yisrael kept the Shabbat, which means as if they kept it forever. That's what he says. But the Zera Shimshon has a question. He says, V'hutema, this is confusing. The ech efshar, how is it possible? Shitnu lo sachar mima shelo shamar. That you should get, why should you get reward for something you didn't do? Right? A person lives down 120 years, but history is going to be at least 6,000, not more, right? 7,000. Why should you get thousands and thousands of years of Shabbat credits when you only kept 120 years of Shabbat? You can't say 120 because you only start getting credit from when you're 13. So subtract. How could it be, he says? Well, furthermore, you have to ask the pasuk on the verse. This verse that we're analyzing. This is the word Shabbat twice. Shabbat, Shabbat. Twice. The first time it says Shabbat, it says Vishamru, and they kept, they guarded. Lashon Shemira, which is again the same language of keeping, like we explained. Uvesheni, the second time it says Shabbat, La'asot. It says La'asot, which means to do. Lashon Asiyah, which is the language of doing. Similar to Zachor, like we explained before. One is guarding, one is doing. What's the connection? It says, we can understand this. Ki be'erev Shabbat, on Friday already, he says, מתחיל להתנוצץ באדם איזו הערה של נשמה יתרה. In a person's soul, certain sparks of what we call the neshama yetera, the extra soul that a person is about to receive on Shabbat, already starts to flutter, already starts to show up and establish itself on Friday. כמו שכתוב, יום השישי, ההא יתרה. Like it says, Yom HaShishi, the sixth day in the Torah, right? Like we say in the Kiddush, for example, Yom HaShishi, the sixth day. The Hey, and the word Hashishi, which means the Hey, that is extra. Why is it extra? Because it's talking about Bereshit, when God explains, the Torah explains how God created every single day, and what He created every single day of the week. And at the end of the paragraph of each day, it says, and it was the evening, and it was morning, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. But when it comes to Friday, it says, the sixth day, Yom HaShishi. The word the, only shows up by the sixth day, by Friday. There's a lot of different drashot for that. One of the drashot are the following. To hint to you, שמי שנקבר בארץ ישראל אחר 5 שעות של יום השישי, that whoever is buried in Eretz Israel after the 5th hour of the day, which means right before Chatzot, right before midday, on Friday, on Friday, on the 6th day of the week, Friday, Nitzol michibut hakever. He's saved from something called chibut hakever, which means the suffering that a soul must go through in the when it's being buried. There's certain suffering happening to it. But if it was buried on Friday after the 5th hour of the day in Eretz Israel, he's completely saved from that suffering. That's what it means, Hashishi, the 6th day. That's the extra hint, one of the hints. And then he takes that straight from the Aliyah Kadosh. He says that. To what? To the word hey? The 6th, because that's the hint. Anytime there's an extra letter in the Torah, it can hint at many things. So here, the hint, teaching that it hints at, that letter hey, the 6th is if you're buried on the 6th day in Eretz Israel. After the 5th hour, you're saved from that suffering. So look, he's going to explain. That's one sort of tangent he explains to you, but then he comes back to what we're talking about. Furthermore, Yom Kadosh, Friday is also a holy day, to prepare oneself, Shabbat, for the needs of Shabbat, and after the midday of Friday, he should prepare himself in proper clothing, like as we know, and be ready to accept Shabbat with a happy heart. And then it says the following. Here's where the connection is. It says in the Gemara, Masechet Chagiga. Masechet Chagiga is there's a few pages that are very, very esoteric, very deep, a lot of Kabbalistic sources. The most outright Kabbalah in all of Shas, the Talmud, the Gemara, right? If you exclude Kabbalistic sources like the Ari Kadosh, Zohar, other things. If you just look at the Shas, the Gemara, the most Kabbalistic area is Masechet Chagiga, where it just talks about pages and pages about very deep esoteric things, hard to understand. But he brings one piece from there. Really, this piece by itself could be talked about for hours, but I just got to focus on the one thing that he wants to bring out for us. It says the following. Tanya Rabbi Shimon HaChassid Amar. Rabbi Shimon HaChassid teaches you the following. Masechet Gaon, Daf Yud Gimel Amud Bet 13b. He brings you a verse from Iyov. Asher kumetu belo et. Which means, hold on a second, I have the translation here. It says, those who were snatched away before their time. In Iyov, in the Tanakh. Who is this referring to? Who was snatched away before their time? The Gemara says, Elu Tatkaad Dorot Shekumentu Lihibaraot Kodem Shenevra Olam V'lo Nevra'u. This is referring to the 974 generations of people that God wanted to create before the world was created, but they never ended up being created. 974 generations. It's a very famous topic. Again, I don't want to go into the deep now. This is the source in the Gemara, Masechet Gigah 13b. But just to simply understand what it means as best we can, Rashi explains there that God, for some reason, the Torah was supposed to be given after 1,000 generations. It was supposed to be given to the thousandth generation of Adam, of people. But God saw that if we waited that long, the world would go straight to Tohu Vavohu, chaos. It would not last that long. Therefore, He had to bring it earlier. Again, what does it mean that God had to change His mind? He didn't know from the beginning. What does this all mean? It's very, like I said, so many questions, esoteric. Let's just stick to the basic and see what it says. Now, once He decided He had to bring it earlier, He cut out the first 974 generations. Cut them out. Says, I'm not going to create you. They just they remained in a realm of thought of God's mind, so to speak, but they never came to actuality into existence. And instead, God ended up giving the Torah 26 generations from creation. In the 26th generation, 26 is Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's God's name. How do you know 26? From Adam Rishon until Noach was 10 generations. All the generations are listed in Sefer Bereshit. I'm not making it up, you can go count it. From Adam to Noach was 10 generations. From Noach to Avraham Avinu was another 10 generations. And from Avraham Avinu to Moshe Rabbeinu, when the Torah was given, was 6 generations. I might embarrass myself by not knowing right now, but I'm going to try to see if I remember the 6. Help me if I forget. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Levi, Kehat, Amram, Moshe. It's again, Avraham was you don't count Avraham because he was the 10th from Noach. You don't count Avraham, you have to count out after. So Yitzchak, Yaakov, Levi, Kehat, Amram, Moshe. It comes out from Adam 26. So 26 plus 974 is a magic number. What is it? 1,000. So it ended up being God's plan still came true. That's the beautiful thing about it. Even if it's adjusted, God can adjust it and still fit it in with what He wanted to. That's only something God can do. That you can take the verses, take the words, take the reality, and bend it to how He had it planned in the first place. So it ends up being He never lies. Can't lie. Doesn't lie, right? Is the definition of truth. So it was given in 1,000 generations, but the first 974 never got to exist. What did He do with them?
But that's not a real fact.
Questions after. I have 5 minutes left. Okay? So the Gemara says, what happened to those 974 generations of people? God took them and He planted them in every generation. A little bit in every generation. Spread them out over time. And who are they? How can you tell who they are? Says the Gemara. Hen azeh panim shebador. They are the azeh panim of the generation. Those who have azut panim, which means the brazen. Very brazen. Very nose high in the air people. That comes from them. That's their root is from the 974.
Maybe.
So based on this information the Gemara gives us,
Hold up, before.
yeah, there's a lot of questions. I'll take one question on this again. Yeah,
74 worlds before, right?
not worlds, generations of people.
Generation, right? Was Hashem had taught to give them Torah for them also, or no?
He again. The Gemara says, Rashi explains, he wanted to give it to the 1000th generation, the 1000th. But then he saw that if we went from Adam 1,000 generations, it wouldn't last that long. It would go completely get destroyed. Without Torah, they won't be able to live. Yeah.
What's the duration for a generation?
About 30, 40 years average. Okay. So now we have these people. The Azir Panim says the Zera Shimshon that the Mekubalim say שהמצוות שאנו עושים בערב Shabbat, the mitzvot you do on Erev Shabbat, on Friday, in preparation for Shabbat, L'chvod Shabbat, with the intent to give honor to Shabbat, meaning getting dressed properly, taking a shower, cleaning the house, preparing the food, all these different things. For Kavod Shabbat, the more you do, the more Kavod you give to the Shabbat. Hem tikun le'elu hadorot. It is a tikun, say the Mekubalim. It is a remedy for those damaged 974 generations. How do we know? What's the connection? V'chein Erev Shabbat gimatria tat ka'ad. The words Erev Shabbat, which means Friday Eve, Ayin Resh Bet, gimatria 272. Shabbat Shin Bet Taf 702. 702 plus 272 is 974. So Friday is a very important day, guys. You're fixing a lot on Friday. Don't waste time on Friday. That's why me personally, I stop working on Friday. Friday, we come in the morning, we learn first, we say very important mitzvah to do Friday, then we go home, prepare until Shabbat.
Until 12 o'clock, no?
A lot of people go to the mikveh Friday. It's a big deal as well. All these things that you're doing are a different tikkun for those generations. Says further over here, V'zeu Pirush, one more paragraph. Hakatuv, that's what it means when it says, כשישמרו בני ישראל את השבת, דהיינו הערב שבת, בראשון ואביב שמע את הדבר בראשית. So remember, there was a midrash that said that when Bnei Israel keeps one Shabbat ketikuna, it's as if he kept all the Shabbats forever. How does it work? He says the word shomer Shabbat, shomer means to keep, to guard. But shomer has another meaning also. That meaning is to anticipate, to expect. How do we know? It says by Yosef HaTzadik. When Yosef had the dreams, he told his brothers about his dreams, that they're going to bow down to him. They said, sounds like an alien, right? They said, what are you talking about? We're not going to bow down to you. They said the dreams over to their father. And Yaakov said, what are you talking about? But the pasuk says, ve'aviv shamar et hadavar. But his father Yaakov, shamar, guarded the matter. What does it mean guarded? Does it mean, over there, shamar doesn't mean guarded. Rashi explains to you right there. Shamar means anticipated, waited for. Because Yaakov knew and he waited. He was excited that his son Yosef would be king. Right? That's what it means shamar et hadavar. He anticipated those dreams to come true. So therefore, you take that meaning of shamar, plug it back into our midrash. So instead of saying whoever is shomer Shabbat ketikuna, whoever keeps Shabbat, guard Shabbat like it's appropriate way, read it differently, he says. Read it whoever is anticipating Shabbat, whoever expects. And when do you anticipate and expect the Shabbat? Friday. Erev Shabbat, when you prepare, that's the anticipation. So whoever does that, he says, Shehu shomer mamtin, is waiting. She'avo Shabbat lekabalo, to accept it properly, b'kedusha and holiness, Torah and purity. And in order to make Shabbat proper, the mishitarach be'erev Shabbat yochol b'Shabbat. It says famous in Masechet Avodah Zarah. Whoever toils and works on erev Shabbat, he's going to eat on Shabbat, and that is a principle not only for Shabbat every week; it's for the entire life. Whoever toils in this world is going to enjoy in the next world, because the next world is called Shabbat. One of the three things, says the Gemara Bachot, that is me'en olam haba, that's similar to Shabbat, is me'en olam haba, that is similar to olam haba in this world, that you can taste olam haba already. What is it? One of them says Shabbat. 160th of olam haba is Shabbat, says the Gemara. Right? So if you prepare an Erev Shabbat, your whole life is an Erev Shabbat. Your whole life is a Friday. Shabbat is in Olam Haba. And if you want to enjoy there, you have to prepare here. That's the only way. That's the only way. No, there's no free lunch, as it says. Furthermore, אז יהיה נחשב לו כאילו שימר כל השבתות מיום שנברא העולם עד תחיית המתים. כלומר, which means כאילו תיקן כל אלה הנשמות שהם שתולים בכל דור ודור. So now it makes perfect sense. The Midrash said that if you keep a Shabbat, it's like you kept all Shabbats ever. But now he's reading it differently. He says, no. The word Shama, like we said, is anticipating. Which means if you anticipate Shabbat properly. Which means if you keep Friday properly. Then it's like you've made a benefit for the entire history. Why? Because we said, what do you do on Friday? Everything you do on Friday is a tikkun for the 974 generations. In those 974 generations, what did God do? He spread them throughout every timeline of history. So that's how you affect the whole history. Because by preparing for Shabbat properly, you are fixing those 974 who exist throughout history. That's the explanation of the Midrash. Amazing chidush by Zera Shimshon. It's an amazing thing. We should appreciate our Fridays and treat them better as well. And B'ezrat Hashem should give us all Geula Shalama. Amen. Rabbi Chaim Kanievski אומר, לצג לסבכו, לזכות את ישראל, לפיכך יבא להם תורה מסוים שאמר, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה ויאדיר. קדיש, על ישראל.